Buying a co-op in New York City in your 20s can make a great deal of sense under certain circumstances. However, there are many financial and lifestyle factors to consider before you pull the trigger. We discuss everything you need to know about buying a New York City co-op in your 20s in this video. I'm Nick at Houseit. Check out our website, houseit.com, to learn how to save money on commission when buying and selling real estate in New York City, Long Island, and the Hudson Valley. So let's get started. So let's start with the first question. Does it make sense to buy an apartment in New York City? Well, buying a co-op apartment is a great way to start building equity over time and stop wasting your money on rent. However, the devil is in the details. Not all apartments in the city are good investments, and many young buyers in their 20s don't factor in closing costs when debating buying versus continuing to rent. The truth is that buying in New York City is a very bad investment if you don't hold on to the property for long enough. This is because combined buyer and seller closing costs for a co-op can add up to anywhere from 10 to 12%. For starters, buyer closing costs for a co-op are close to 2%. When it comes time to sell, you'll be on the hook for at least 8%. This includes city and state transfer taxes as well as the traditional 6% broker commission. Moreover, if your co-op has a flip tax, this could add 1 to 3% to your closing cost bill. By definition, this means that the co-op apartment you purchase must appreciate by at least 10% before you break even. So if you do buy an apartment and decide to upsize or move out of the city after 2 or 3 years, chances are that you'll actually lose money when selling after factoring in closing costs. And this means it would have probably been better to rent all along. Many young buyers don't consider that they may need to upgrade to a larger apartment sooner than anticipated. In addition, buyers in their 20s are typically in the very early stages of their careers. As a result, they often underestimate the possibility that a job change, promotion, relocation, or other change of circumstance may take them away from New York City for several years or possibly forever. Co-ops are intended for use as a primary residence, and most buildings have strict limitations on the amount of subletting which is permitted. Now, this means that you cannot hold on to your co-op apartment indefinitely as an investment property rental if you relocate out of New York City for the long term, as would be possible with a true condo. As a result, many co-op owners are forced to sell prematurely because the co-op building will not allow them to sublet any further. Beyond closing costs, another factor for you to consider is opportunity cost. Tying up, say, $100,000 or $200,000 of your savings in a down payment prevents you from investing in other asset classes, such as the stock market. And stocks have handily outperformed real estate over the past few years. Moreover, most other asset classes are far more liquid than real estate. It's much harder for you to extract equity from your co-op if you ever need to free up some cash compared to an investment in, say, the stock market. Finally, it's important to consider that not all co-ops in New York City are good investments. As the old adage goes, money is made when you buy and not when you sell. Outright overpaying for an apartment or buying an undesirable or generic co-op unit can come back to bite you when it comes time to sell, particularly if market conditions deteriorate as they did during and after the COVID-19 pandemic. That being said, many co-ops in New York City are sound investments which almost always appreciate over time. An experienced buyer's agent can help you navigate the purchase process and discern good investments from riskier ones. Can you really afford a co-op in New York City? Most buyers in their 20s gravitate towards co-ops because they're much cheaper than condos. Co-ops can be anywhere from 10% to 40% less expensive than condos on average. Moreover, co-ops have lower buyer closing costs of around 2% compared to around 4% or more for condos. However, co-ops have several financial hurdles which are particularly relevant for someone in their 20s. These include the following: a minimum down payment requirement of 20%, and in some cases, significantly more. A debt-to-income ratio requirement of at least 25% for most buildings. A post-closing liquidity requirement of around 1 to 2 years on average. Now, these co-op financial requirements are particularly challenging to meet for buyers in their 20s, for obvious reasons. A young buyer may have just started her or his career and probably has a fairly low salary and a relatively small amount of money saved for a down payment. While a lender will typically underwrite up to a 43% debt-to-income ratio, most co-ops won't allow anything higher than 25%. Therefore, it may be difficult for a young buyer to qualify for a co-op based on their income alone, meaning that a condo might be the only option. However, since condos are usually 10 to 40% more expensive, a young buyer may have to stretch her or his budget to buy a condo, and this means having more cash available for a down payment. It also means living in a smaller place. Even if a buyer in her or his 20s can meet the DTI requirement, most co-ops require at least 20% down plus at least 1 to 2 years of mortgage and maintenance in post-closing liquidity. For a typical co-op in Park Slope, that's around $600,000, this means having around $120K in savings for the down payment plus another $75K in liquid assets for a total cash requirement of around $200,000. Now this works out to around 33% of the purchase price of the apartment, which is much higher than you might be planning for. If you're short on assets, keep in mind that some co-ops may allow you to receive a gift to fortify your finances. Some co-op buildings may also permit co-purchasing, guarantors, or parents buying for children. Are you willing to undergo the board approval process for a co-op? In addition to the steep financial requirements, co-ops in New York City have a rigorous board approval process which is particularly challenging for young buyers in their 20s. This is because co-op buildings often hesitate to approve buyers who look young due to the stereotypical perception that young people are immature and likely to party, make noise, and otherwise cause damage. While age discrimination is obviously illegal in New York, co-op boards aren't required to disclose the reason for a board rejection. As a result, young and financially qualified buyers routinely get rejected all the time by co-op boards in New York City for baseless and discriminatory reasons. In one egregious instance we're familiar with, a Greenwich Village co-op rejected the purchase application for the co-purchase of a $1 million apartment by a young 20s female and her mother who had a combined net worth of $20 million. The daughter even went so far as to wear a wig to cover her dyed hair during the co-op board interview, but ultimately it was all for naught. The co-op board rejected the applicants and failed to disclose any reason, even though they were obviously extremely qualified for the purchase. From what we hear, this building's proximity to NYU had created problems over the years, with lots of partying and other unruly activity happening in apartments which parents had bought for children or which parents had bought as pied-à-terres. In another egregious example, which also happened to be in Greenwich Village, a co-op demanded that a gainfully employed 27-year-old purchaser come up with 4 years of post-closing liquidity and arrange for a guarantor in order to be approved for the purchase, despite the fact that the building generally required just 2 years of post-closing liquidity for all other applicants. While this buyer was ultimately approved after complying with the demands of the co-op board, being treated differently solely due to his age was a highly traumatic experience for the purchaser. The co-op board interview is also more difficult for a buyer in her or his 20s. This is because board members who are concerned by an applicant's young age often ask inappropriate questions. We've heard of the following questions being asked of young purchasers during co-op board interviews here in New York City. Do you like to entertain in your apartment? How do you like to socialize? Do you have a girlfriend? How often do you cook? Moreover, it's not uncommon for co-op board members to review the social media posts of a young buyer as part of a witch hunt to find evidence of excessive partying, socializing, etc., anything they can find to justify a rejection. Can you live with the rules and restrictions of a New York City co-op? While both condo and co-ops in New York City have fairly strict house rules, co-ops are more likely to have the strictest rules, and they're more likely to engage in the most aggressive enforcement of such rules. For example, one West Village co-op prohibits owners from having overnight guests unless the owner is also sleeping in the apartment at the same time. This is just one of many examples of overbearing and neurotic co-op boards attempting to meddle with and regulate every aspect of life in the building. The perception of you being a young homeowner may also result in neighbors or building management singling you out and treating you much more harshly compared to other owners when it comes to enforcing rules. In one example we're familiar with, which was in fact for a small condo building, the board initiated legal action against a 27-year-old purchaser because he installed an air conditioner, despite the fact that every other unit in the building already had a similar HVAC air conditioning setup. You're also much more likely to be specifically accused of noise complaints as a young homeowner in New York City. Referencing the previous example, whenever this 27-year-old homeowner made any sort of noise, such as watching TV or playing any form of music, the owner downstairs, who also happened to be the board president, would file baseless noise complaints with building management and notify the board and all other owners in his correspondence. This went on for over a year until the young owner took legal action against the board president to stop the harassment. What are the steps to buying a co-op in New York City? The entire process of buying a co-op in New York City from start to finish takes around 3 months from the time you're in contract. For an in-depth review of the co-op closing timeline in New York City, please check out our blog post on the topic. The link is below and above. The search phase itself can take anywhere from a few weeks to a year or more. How long it takes to find a suitable apartment depends on how broad or narrow the search criteria is. The process of submitting an offer and negotiating typically takes around a week or two. Once your offer is accepted, the contract review and buyer due diligence process, both of which are handled by your real estate attorney, takes around 7 to 10 business days. It's customary to make a 10% earnest money deposit at the time of signing a contract. Now, this is held in the escrow account maintained by the seller's attorney until closing. Buyers often confuse the terms contract deposit and down payment. If you're putting down 20% and the contract deposit is 10%, you'd pay the remaining 10% of the down payment at the time of closing. From the moment you're in contract, it takes around 2 months to close for an all-cash purchase and roughly 3 months to close if you're financing. In the case of a finance purchase, the first step after signing the contract is to apply for your mortgage. Now, the process of obtaining a commitment letter takes around 4 weeks. During this waiting period, you'll begin to prepare the co-op board application. The board application typically requires a copy of the commitment letter, so best practice is to substantially complete the board package such that you can quickly slot in the commitment letter and submit the application the moment your lender issues the loan commitment. Once the board application is submitted, it usually takes around a week for the building's managing agent to review the application and transmit it to the co-op board. The transfer agent at the managing agent will reject the application if any required items are omitted. So this can delay the process by a few weeks or perhaps maybe a week, as all errors or omissions need to be cured before resubmitting the application. And when the application is resubmitted, the managing agent will re-review the entire application before transmitting it to the board. And in the meantime, they might have newer applications to review before yours. The board typically responds to applications within 4 to 6 weeks. Now, this timeline can vary greatly depending on the time of year and how many other applications the board has to review. If the board is leaning towards accepting the applicant, they will typically invite the proposed purchaser for a board interview. The co-op will typically release its decision, approval, or rejection within a few days of the interview. If you're approved, the next step is to coordinate the closing between buyer and seller attorneys, the lender, if there is one, and building management. This process usually takes 1 or 2 weeks. Upon closing and receiving the keys to the apartment, the next step is to schedule a move-in date with building management. So there you have it. We hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please like, subscribe, and leave us a comment. We'd greatly appreciate it. I'm Nick at Houseit, and we'll see you on the next video.